On this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, we are back again talking about the possibility of Lauri Markkanen becoming a Detroit Piston. We also take a look inside the ESPN's top 100 NBA player rankings. What Pistons made it? What Pistons didn't? Were the rankings right? Were they wrong? We dive into all of that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Let's get it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
What is going on, Pistons fans? Welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe and the FanDuel Sports Book. Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia here with you for this week's show. We are almost there. The Detroit Pistons Media Day is on Monday. Unfortunately, I'm not able to make it. It's very unfortunate, but that means we are officially on the cusp of training camp. The NBA is finally back and super pumped to be here. The offseason is always way too long for me, and by the time we get to the middle of August, I'm like, wow, can we please be playing NBA basketball tomorrow? But Media Day here, it means we are at that point, and we are going to quickly progress from Media Day into training camp, and then into preseason, and into the regular season before you know it. And we are glad that you're here listening and watching along as we get closer and closer to the start. Jasper, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, Aaron. As you said, the NBA season is approaching, and guys, we have content to argue about. Like, how wonderful is that? That's what we do this for. We do this all for content. We do this all for you guys. We do this all for Adam Silver's TikTok addiction. So that's what it's all about, Aaron, and it's great to be here with you today.
I know that the NBA is back because of our friends over at the FanDuel Sportsbook. If you go on now, and I have looked at this every week, waiting to see when it would be posted, we have game odds for the opening week of NBA basketball. The Detroit Pistons on the road against the Chicago Bulls are 3.5 point favorites. What do we think about that initial line? Are we doing some at just under a month away? Are we doing some betting on the Pistons just under a month away from tip?
If I'm betting on an NBA regular season game a month away from tip-off, something's gone terribly wrong. you're like you have enough about as good a chance as like, no, I can't say that on the air. Sorry, I was about to say something highly offensive. I'm not going to say that, but it's a bad idea. Let's just leave it at that.
3.5.
Like, you don't want a Fred VanVleet type thing going on here. I don't want to jinx anything. Let's just say, I would have felt a lot better about betting on the Tigers, say, to win their division in July than I would feel about betting on an NBA regular season game a month out. You know what I mean? Especially if they had, say, like a 14.5 game lead.
Look, I'm just hate watching at this point. I have been using our friends over at the FanDuel Sportsbook to hate watch the Detroit Tigers, specifically against the Cleveland Guardians, by betting on the Guardians every time they play the Detroit Tigers, and I'm having a good time with that. I think
Aaron,
the official breaking point was when Tarek Skubal decided that he had transitioned into a center in the NFL and started snapping the ball to Spencer Torkelson. That was probably the final straw for me. I was already off of the Tigers. Had already admitted their defeat, but that was the last thing for me, I think.
Yeah, Skubal going Don Mulback mode was not a great look for me. But I have good news, Aaron. If you're having fun betting on the Guardians to beat the Tigers, guess who it looks like they're going to face in the first round of the playoffs?
It's sad because there's also a pathway for the Tigers to lose out the season and still be in the playoffs.
Here's the one thing I'll say. The last time they blew a very easy division lead and fell into the wild card spot and then went on a miracle run to make the World Series, 2006. Could we have a repeat?
I'll say this: if they lose out and still get in, I'll be all in on them because they will have absolutely nothing to play for. They will feel zero expectations, and that is maybe like the perfect thing for them because right now it feels like every time they throw a pitch, every time they try to field a ball, every time they step to the plate, they're so nervous, they're so anxious, and it's like they've just forgotten how to play baseball. But back to where we were here. If you want to get in on the action, if you're one of those psychos that thinks 3.5 points, you're giving me a month to sit on this. This line's going to move to 5.5, 6.5 points. You can get in on it now over at FanDuel. Pistons 3.5 point favorites against the Chicago Bulls. I will say this: I'm not betting it right now, but that feels like a decent opportunity to back the Pistons if you feel like they're going to win. I think that roster-wise, they are a much better team than the Chicago Bulls, but you're going on the road. There is the hype of opening night. You know, the Bulls will have a probably a decent crowd there, so just something to keep an eye on. But that is not why we're here. We're not here to talk about the Pistons and Bulls game that is a month away. We are here to talk about actual Pistons content. And let's start with something that we have talked about on several occasions, really for probably the last 2 years now, and that is Utah Jazz forward Lauri Markkanen. Zach Lowe on his podcast, The Zach Lowe Show, said that he believes Lauri Markkanen is a prime candidate to be traded in this upcoming season. And the first team that he listed as favorite landing spot for Lauri Markkanen was the Detroit Pistons. Now, in previous conversations, I've been all about the idea of trading for Lauri Markkanen. Since he has signed a massive extension with the Jazz that in the final year, which is the 2028-2029 season, he'll be making over $53 million annually. But this is a guy that is now, he's an all-star. He's made an all-star appearance. He has become an absolute flamethrower of a scorer, can finish at the rim explosively. But since going to Utah has just kind of fallen into this, plays 50, plays 60 games, gets sat a bunch because Utah is always awful. And so it feels like we're not getting a full look at him. We got it really, I feel like, in his first season, but the last 2 years after he made that initial All-Star game, he's just kind of been held back a little bit by some resting and whatnot. Maybe he's had some real injuries in there as well. That certainly can be the case. But Lauri Markkanen, 28 years old, now locked up under a long-term contract, 2 years removed from an All-Star appearance. The asking price would likely be pretty high to acquire Lauri Markkanen, Jasper.
Yeah, and I think that's there's two issues I have with a potential Lauri Markkanen trade. Look, offensively, I don't think that there's any question he would fit right in with his Pistons team. 6'10", absolute flamethrower from outside. I mean, a career like 37% shooter from three, and very, very high volume. I mean, you look, especially since he's gone to Utah, the guy shoots about 8 threes a game, hits about 39% of them. So that is an offensive weapon for the Pistons that there is no question fits not just like a need in terms of spacing, but a need in terms of their power forward play. And as of right now, you do have Tobias Harris at the power forward. I don't necessarily anticipate that being the case after the season with his contract being up. And when you look at the Pistons roster and the pieces they have there definitely is, as we've said, the flexibility in order to absorb a contract like Lauri Markkanen's with sending out assets in terms of expiring contracts and in terms of young players. That being said, I am not sold on a couple aspects of Lauri Markkanen's game. First off, you mentioned it, health. And yes, the Utah Jazz have been very bad and they've had an impetus to shut him down. But Aaron, he's never played more than 68 games in an NBA season, and that came his rookie year. The guy has played 50 games in a season more than he's played 60 games in a season. So for me, that is a worrying thing in terms of health. He's just not a guy who could stay on the floor for 80 games, not even 80 games. Can't even stay on the floor for 70 games. So if you do trade for him, you're trading for a guy that you're paying $53 million to in the last year of his deal that might be making $1 million a game. No joke. The other issue I have is on the defensive end of the floor. Yes, he absolutely fits in offensively, but defensively, look, the Pistons have created a bit of an identity for themselves in the last, in the last 12 months. And this is after they had no identity for about 15 years. So for me, when I look at this team, I say, hey, they got somewhere based on having this hard-nosed defensive presence. Where does Lauri Markkanen fit into that? I don't think he does at all. He's a negative defender. He's better than he was in Chicago, sure. And it's hard to tell with a team in flux like Utah's, so many young players, so many bad defenders, not a lot of pieces that go together because they're trying to lose games. But he's a negative on that end of the floor. And I think when, you say you look at last year's series against the New York Knicks, sure, could Lauri Markkanen have helped out a lot on the offensive end? Yes. But what on earth would they have done with Karl Anthony Towns defensively? Like, what on earth would they have done if they had Lauri Markkanen instead of Tobias Harris there? So for that reason, and for the price tag that would be involved, because it would be a hefty price tag, Aaron, I think we're in agreement on this. I think it'd be, maybe a young guy and a pick and maybe some offloading salary.
I think the package that was thrown out was something along the lines of Tobias Harris, Jaden Ivey, 2 or 3 first-round picks, and you still would have potentially had to include someone like Ron Holland.
That's
it's an expensive package
for a guy who's made one All-Star team in his career. For me, like I've said it, I think consolidating moves are a must, but they have to be the right ones. And I think it's easy to fall in love with a guy's stats and not look where he fits into the overall NBA hierarchy sometimes. I think when you look at the overall NBA hierarchy, is Lauri Markkanen a top 20 player in the NBA? Is he top 30 player? Is he top 40? I'm more inclined to put him towards that top 35, top 40 than I am to put him inside that top 20. And so I think when you're looking at what it would take to get him, what he would cost in terms of not just assets, but in terms of on your books, and where he fits into the identity of this team, I get it, but we're not playing fantasy basketball here. It's a little bit of like Eagles' dream team where it's like, yeah, all these guys look great on paper, but how do they fit together? I'm not sure. For me, Lauri Markkanen fits into where I want to see the Pistons progress as these young guys' careers continue to go along.
I would love to see Lauri Markkanen in a Pistons uniform, specifically for what I think he could bring to them offensively, right? His shooting ability, his movement shooting, what he can do on offense, what he could open up, putting him out there alongside Cade Cunningham, I think would be super, super intriguing. But I certainly see maybe the holdback when you think of a defensive tandem of Markkanen and Jalen Duren. Obviously Duren took a step last year defensively, but still has a serious room to grow in that regard. And I just think that it would be very wonky. And I think you go back to that Knicks series, and I think you're right. Like, how do you make that work? Tobias Harris did an admirable job when they finally switched him on to Karl Anthony Towns. Would Lauri Markkanen have that same success? Would he be able to do it? I don't know. It's tough because I don't feel like we've gotten the full look at Lauri Markkanen that we did in his first year in Utah, the 2 years after. It just feels like we have gotten a much shorter view of him. He's played less games. He's played less minutes. And for that reason, it draws me back from him a little bit, because now he's 28. He's not 25 anymore. He's 28. And you're talking about when he's 31, he's going to be making $53 million. that's a lot of money. And then you have to also consider the cost to get him. Tobias Harris, who on any other team in the NBA may not be as impactful, but for this Detroit Pistons team, we know how impactful he was last year. And for him, it's not about the counting stats. It's not about it's about his presence and just the stable piece that he was last year. So that is a real loss. I know there might be some people out there that are still brainwashed by some of his moments in Philadelphia, but Tobias Harris is still a good player, and he very much helped the Pistons last year. So to lose him, that would be a big loss. Then you're talking about you're losing someone like either or and Jaden Ivey and Ron Holland, two young, promising players, plus several first-round draft picks. I just don't know if that move helps you as much as you would think on paper. I'd be interested in him, but I feel like as more time has passed, it's become a little less interesting because of the new contract, because of the rise in age, and because I also just feel like the Pistons are at a moment right now where if they're going to take a swing, if they're going to sell some assets, if they're going to consolidate some of the young pieces, it needs to be for a for sure bona fide guy to get alongside Cade Cunningham. And while I like Lauri Markkanen a lot, I just don't know if he's that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's ultimately like kind of what it comes down to is we're going to talk about ESPN's player rankings. They had him at 43. And frankly, I could nitpick that, but like sounds about right to me and is giving up what it would take to get Lauri Markkanen for his contract, with his health, with his defensive deficiencies, and with his fit on this roster. Like if you're keeping Jalen Duren, especially, like I don't know, is that really worth it for the 40th best player in the NBA? I'm not convinced. I'm just not convinced of that when what it would take to potentially get like a top 20 player in the NBA. I don't know. I guess for me, it's like, would you rather spend that on Lauri Markkanen or would you rather spend way less and like take a risk on Zion? I'd rather take a risk on Zion. Like, I mean, frankly, that's kind of where I come down to it on that. And maybe he wouldn't fit as well, but like, I think there's more upside. And if you're the Pistons right now, you need to be making upside trades. You can't be just, consolidating because it's like, well, we think we're at this certain point and we want to take a step, so we need to improve our roster. That's not what good teams do. Good teams do make those, like bad teams make those kind of moves. Yeah, they mildly upgrade the roster in terms of like the counting stats at the expense of their long-term health. And I just think there's no way to avoid that with a Lauri Markkanen trade, especially with his health. And especially, like you said, considering his contract will be up when he's 32 years old. Like that's 4 years of Lauri Markkanen potentially getting injured and falling off a cliff that you have to contend with there. For me, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I think if the Pistons were going to go and try to make a move where they're going after a significant name, I feel like I'd rather go after someone like a Derek White, who I know he's going to fit. I feel like there's an opportunity for him to be available. Looking at where Boston's projected to be at this year, maybe they want to save some money. I don't think he would cost as much as Lauri Markkanen. That's just a random player. It's not like there's anything behind that, but it's just like if I'm looking at fit, if I'm looking at the player costs, if I'm looking at the contracts, I feel like I'd rather go and get someone like that. That being said, you could also go look at Derek White and be like, well, he's already 31. You want to be paying him 35, 36, $40 million, whatever it's going to be when he's 34. I don't know. You can nitpick any move, but Lauri Markkanen to me sounds a lot better in theory than he does in actuality on this roster when you look at just all of the cost again that it would cost. Like I'm trying to think of this team with Lauri Markkanen, but they've lost Tobias Harris, they've lost Jaden Ivey, they've lost Ron Holland. That's two starters and a their 8th, 9th man, essentially, maybe 7th man. So that's a lot to lose for a guy that essentially just takes Tobias Harris's spot. plus the draft capital that you lose, which for a team that is going to be paying, or looks like they're going to be paying a lot of young people here, giving the contract extensions out. I've beat this drum for a while now, but you need to have those draft assets, especially first round picks, so that you can replenish and get some role players on smaller, cheaper contracts that fit into your team's, window to compete. So it does really feel like a lot for Lauri Markkanen, and maybe that perception's off. Maybe his value is not that anymore, but you have to feel like Danny Ainge in Utah, with how he operates, is going to be asking for a king's ransom for a player of Markkanen's caliber, even if it is an over ask at this point.
Yeah, I think we're in total agreement on this, Aaron. Good in theory, but I just don't see how it works in practice. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, there will be other trades will reveal themselves throughout the season. I just don't think there's any need for the Pistons to rush something like that. Truly, we've been saying this all offseason. They're in wait and see mode. And again, that's why Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren still remain without an extension. They're still in the process of figuring out exactly the path they're going to take forward, and blowing a bunch of capital on Lauri Markkanen just doesn't, to me, seem like it fits into that equation.
Agreed. Okay, let's move on to our other topic for this week's show. We're kind of dissecting the infamous, at this point, ESPN NBA player rankings that get released prior to the start of each season. We had 3 Pistons crack the top 100. Let's start towards the top with Jaden Ivey and Tobias Harris. Those 2 players ranked 84th for Tobias Harris, 85th for Jaden Ivey in the league, according to ESPN. I thought this was really interesting because Jaden Ivey missed the majority of last year. I did think he obviously took a step forward, but I just look at some of the other guys that got in, some of the other guys that didn't get in, specifically on the Pistons, and I wonder how they got to Jaden Ivey getting into the top 100, but not either of Jalen Duren or Ausar Thompson. Jasper, I'll turn it over to you now. You feel the same or a little different?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where they're projecting where guys are going to be this year. And here's the argument you make for Jaden Ivey, which is that, look, he was shooting 40% from 3 last year before he went down. His efficiency was much better. He hit a couple game winners. He had shown a progression in his game, even if we did have, still issues with his overall play in terms of some of the things he doesn't bring to the floor right now. For me, Tobias is perfectly placed. I think that's like a totally appropriate ranking for him. Whatever, move him up, move him down a couple spots, who cares? But with Jaden Ivey, I think if you're projecting for this season, I think that's about right. Like, he's about in there. I think he will be better than Bradley Beal, for what it's worth, who was ranked 1 spot below him. So I have no problem with that. I think for me, the bigger issue I have is with the guys that were left off. In particular, Ausar Thompson, but I think you can also make a legitimate argument for Jalen Duren there as well, because, hey, if we're projecting, on half a season of play into this year to make these rankings, I don't see why Jalen Duren isn't on this list and, say, Jonas Valanciunas is. Because, yes, while Jalen Duren was still a very real negative on the defensive side of the floor in the first half of the season, post-January, he was okay. He was solid. Like, he wasn't above average by any means, but you could live with Jalen Duren on that end of the floor. And he remains one of the best offensive and defensive rebounders in the entire NBA, as well as a nearly unstoppable lob threat. When I look at somebody like that, boy, when I'm looking at some of these other names on this list, like you talk about guys with, skill sets that are kind of up and down, and, well, he has this weakness, always got this strength. Jonathan Kuminga. Did Jonathan Kuminga really do much in your eyes to elevate him over, say, Jalen Duren in terms of what he brings to the floor? I mean, for God's sake, he's got to take a qualifying offer with the Golden State Warriors. That, to me, is if you told the Pistons, like, right now, You can pay Jalen Duren $20 million a year, or you can pay him the qualifying offer, or he walks. Like, I think they would not let him walk right now. They would definitely lock him up long term if they knew that was the other option. But the real argument here is for Asar Thompson. How on earth is this guy not on the list? Insane to me, especially when you look at how high up his brother is on the list. I think he was what? He was, I got to find it really quickly. He was inside the top 40 for sure. He's at 37. 37. That to me is crazy. Look, I know that Amen had the bigger year, but when you look at his and Asar's per 36 minutes next to each other, if you haven't looked at them regularly, like some of us sickos here have, find me the difference. You will have a very, very hard time telling apart which one is Asar and which one is Amen. And I just think when you look at it, and like, again, it's one of those things where if we're extrapolating half a season into this year's projections, I don't see how you can have arguably the best perimeter defender in the entire NBA for the half of the season of basketball that he played last year, not on this list. That to me is crazy. And even more so if you're just like projecting for this year, to not have Asar Thompson on this list is absolutely insane. How many guys inside the, like, between 100 and like 60 would you have to package together if you were a team in order to pry Asar Thompson away from the Pistons? Because I got to tell you, I don't think, Jonathan Kuminga and Norman Powell, Andrew Nembhard, and Tuamani Kamara would get it done, right? So that to me is crazy, especially somebody like Tuamani Kamara. How is Tuamani Kamara on the list and Asar Thompson is not? What's the difference here? Yeah, Tuamani Kamara is basically like Asar Thompson if Asar Thompson was worse at rebounding, worse at stealing the ball, worse at blocks, and worse at getting to the rim. But other than that, yeah, he deserves to be on there over him. So that to me was a really baffling decision.
The player rankings to me from ESPN every year are always just engagement bait, in my opinion, and I would never take these to heart. I don't think you're doing yourself a favor by taking any of these too personally or anything like that. That being said, for the sake of dissecting them, they're awful. Aaron Nesmith's at 65. If you polled 30 general managers and said, hey, would you rather have Aaron Nesmith or Asar Thompson? 30 of them would say Asar Thompson, and probably 25 of them would say half of an Asar Thompson rather than a full Aaron Nesmith. So, yeah, I really just think they're a joke. I don't know how they come together with these. I'm not the biggest Tyler Hero believer out there, but like Tyler Hero's at 68 and Aaron Nesmith's at 65. What are we doing? Tyler Hero made an all-star game last year. Aaron Nesmith looked good as like the 5th, 6th, 7th guy on Indiana in the playoffs. So that gets him the credit to jump as much as he has. I'd rather have Tobias Harris rather than Aaron Nesmith, but
how about Denny Avdia? How about Denny Avdia at 66?
Yeah. I don't know. I think looking at who's in and looking at especially some of the guys that like just snuck in, like Jonas Valanciunas, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Mitchell Robinson. I'm stunned that Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson are not in there. I mean, Mitchell Robinson, the guy barely played last year. Jonas Valanciunas is a backup center. He was going to go to where was he going to go? Latvia to play because he wasn't going to have a big role this year in the NBA or whatever. Like, these are strictly engagement baiting opportunities for ESPN. It's an opportunity to draw clicks, to draw social media engagements, to draw comments, just to draw eyes. And they do a good job of making these controversial. So that's credit to them for not necessarily doing media here, but doing entertainment. And they're doing a good job of that. They're pumping some good numbers based off these rankings. Like Jakob Poeltl, who was really good for Toronto last year, is behind Mitchell Robinson. Jakob Poeltl's 93rd. Come on, man. Just these rankings are a joke. I do think that Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren have a case. Heck, if we're including people like Mitchell Robinson, I think you could start looking at guys like Isaiah Stewart. Malik Beasley wasn't included in this list. Malik Beasley was a 6 Man of the Year candidate last year. I think that he'd have Zach Edey got in. Like, I just think this list is all over the place. It's like giving certain guys the benefit of the doubt and raising their, giving them a bump for their expectations for the upcoming season while not accounting for their last season's body of work. So I don't know. You could go over these for every team and say, well, this guy deserves to be in and this or that. But no, truly wild stuff from ESPN. Zion Williamson at 61 feels like Cade Cunningham being at 67 last year. Like, even if Zion, misses time, like, he is still a top 40 player in the league without questioning it. So, especially when you look at some of these guys that are ahead of him in the rankings. So, I don't know, man. Funny to me. We've got one more guy to hit on that made it in the top 100 for Detroit, and that's Cade Cunningham. According to ESPN, Cade Cunningham is the 12th best player in the NBA. He's right ahead of Evan Mobley at 13, Anthony Davis at 14, and Donovan Mitchell at 15. Right ahead of him, though, is Jalen Williams at 11 and Jalen Brunson at 10. So Cade Cunningham at 12. Jasper, just right, a little off, way off. What do we think?
I would switch him and Jalen Williams, maybe, but that's about it. I mean, Jalen Williams also dropped a 40-piece in the NBA Finals. So, like, I can hear the argument. I can hear the argument for Jalen Williams. I don't agree with it, of course, but accomplishments are accomplishments. And I think at the end of the day, like, that's one of those things where you look back at it and, at the time, let's say 15 years ago, when you were talking about somebody like Chauncey Billups versus Baron Davis, and sure, was Baron Davis might have been more, there was a real argument. But now you look back at it with the hindsight and you go, well, no, there's no question. Chauncey Billups had a much, much better career than Baron Davis across the board. And I think sometimes, like, it's easy to get caught up in this guy's more talented, this guy's got better numbers maybe at this point, blah, blah, blah. But the other guy has put up in the biggest stage. And so I can see that argument. I don't agree with it, but I see it. I have no problem with Brunson being over Cade. I mean, they played in a playoff series last year. Brunson came out on top. He was probably the best player in that entire series, even with, Asar Thompson being locked on him for as much as he was. I mean, he hit the series winning shot at the end of the day. Like, what else can you say there? He deserves to be on there over Cade Cunningham. I really have no issue with Cade at 12. Honestly, if they had moved him down even a spot or two and put one guy over him, like, I could see an argument for, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I could see an argument for you putting somebody like, Anthony Davis over him or Donovan Mitchell. I could see the argument for it. Again, I think this is a proper ranking, but I could see the argument. So yeah, unlike last year, I have no issue with Cade's ranking here. I think it's pretty accurate. He is a top 15 player in the NBA, and let's be real, there's a good chance that when we look at next year's list, he's going to be higher than he is right now. So I think it's a perfectly proper ranking for the Pistons' best player.
Unfortunately, for the sake of argument, I don't really disagree with you. I think it's a fair spot. Unlike, let's say, Evan Mobley being at 13 and Anthony Davis being at 14, or even Donovan, like, they have Evan Mobley as the best player on the Cavs, and that's not true yet. Donovan Mitchell is still the best player. Until Evan Mobley proves otherwise, I don't know why he's ranked ahead of Donovan Mitchell. I don't know why he's ranked ahead of Anthony Davis. But no, I think for Cade, I know there are some people that are going to feel like he deserves to be in the top 10. I think if we come in here next year and he's not within the top 10, assuming he continues on the trajectory that he's on, then I think ESPN's going to have made a mistake. But I think we're right in saying that Jalen Williams, you look at the finals that he had, and I think he deserves that benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's not like he's a scrub. He's a 22 5-5 guy that had major performances in the playoffs. Jalen Brunson, as much as I think him and Cade Cunningham are neck and neck, and I think all three of these guys, Williams, Brunson, and Cunningham, are neck and neck. I think Brunson deserves that nod because, hey, he was the best player in that playoff series that included both him and Cade Cunningham. And his team came out on top, and Jalen Brunson was the reason that happened. You think of the plays that he had, the gravity that he had in that series. But I don't think it's a slight at Cade Cunningham in the slightest. It was a slight last year when he was ranked 67th, and he jumps from 67 all the way to 12. He just turned 24 today? Is it 24? I think he just turned 24.
Yeah, he just turned 24.
This is a projection to the trajectory for him is to eventually get inside the top 10, and it feels like he's on his way. And by next year, we could see him inside of the top 10 if he continues to progress. This is not his apex. This is just on the ascent for him. So 12 feels pretty much right. I could see 11. I could see him getting the nod over Jalen Williams. I mean, Cade Cunningham is the number one option on his team. He has the better stats. He has all of the gravity and the attention that comes with being a point guard, being the number one option. Jalen Williams definitely does benefit from the ecosystem that he's in, getting to play off the MVP. So if you're saying, we think he should be 11, I would say fine. I could grant that argument. But if you're talking about him being inside the top 10, you have to tell me who you're kicking out of the top 10, which is always the part of the conversation that gets forgotten about when we're talking about, oh, this guy should have been an all-star. This guy should have been this. Like, okay, maybe you're right, but if you're right, you've got to take somebody out. And who deserves to lose their spot to this guy? And, outside of Jalen Williams, I don't really know if there's an argument for anybody that's in the top 10. So Cade Cunningham, number 12 on ESPN. Maybe he's number 11. We'll see by the end of this year where he would rank.
I think for me, the expectation is that after this season, he will overtake several guys in that top 10. I think he will overtake Steph Curry. I think he will overtake LeBron James. I think he has a very good shot at overtaking Kevin Durant. And here's the thing about it. You can make an argument for him over these guys coming into this season like that. If you tell me he'll have a better season than LeBron James or Stephen Curry, I totally buy that. Completely buy that. There's no reason for me not to believe that he will come out of this season being ahead of those guys in the pecking order of overall NBA players. I just think it's as of right now, he's right in that mix, in between that 14 to 7 range. And you can make an argument for any of those guys based on whatever criteria you want to put in there. You broke down with the Jalen Williams thing. There's a bunch of reasons you could take Cade. There's a bunch of reasons you could take Jalen Williams. I know why I'd take Cade, but I could hear you argue for Jalen Williams as well. Exactly. I can hear you argue for Stephen Curry, right?
This isn't a get your pitchforks out situation.
No, this isn't
ESPN's going to put Cade Cunningham over their, essentially the holy trinity of this generation of basketball: LeBron James, Stephen Curry, and Kevin Durant. Those guys are going to be inside the top 10.
This is a torch pass season. For me, this really feels like a torch passing season because those guys are on their way out. I don't think any of them have more than 2 or 3 seasons left in them. Watch me now watch LeBron play till he's 60, but yeah, I think that's kind of what it is. This is kind of a passing of the torch moment. These guys are on their way up. Those guys are on their way down. I have no issue with those kind of rankings. As long as you don't have Cade Cunningham ranked the same place that Cameron Johnson is now ranked for this season. Think about that. They had Cade Cunningham in the Cam Johnson slot. Ridiculous.
Wild.
Absolutely ridiculous, man.
The ESPN rankings always are great at getting emotion and getting reaction out of people. So we had to cover this. We had to talk about it. I'm sure it's something that people want to hear us.
Aaron, here's my question to you. Who of the Pistons, so there's 3 Pistons in the top 100. There's many more that aren't on next year's list. Who do you think makes it, and is there anybody that you think falls off the list from this team?
Well, man, you would really hope that Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson are within the top 100 next year. If they're not, that means something went very much wrong, because I think they were both. If I'm making my top 100 list, they are both in it this year, and I think, I don't know how ESPN decides this, because it feels like they have certain criteria for some players and certain criteria for others that they take into account. Like should Jaden Ivey have been in this year, considering he played 30 of the 80 games that he was eligible to play in? I don't necessarily know that he should have, especially over two of his teammates that played more games than him, that were very productive and played in the playoffs and had success. So I think those two need to be in. I don't know if anybody falls out. I mean, I could see Tobias Harris falling out. Just if you look at the Pistons roster with Jaden Ivey back and some of the steps that you could see guys like Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey making, Asar Thompson, is some of the offensive production that Tobias Harris had this patch, is that going to go, or some of those touches going to go to some of these other guys? I feel like that could play a role in it, to the point where maybe his numbers just fall off just enough that, he's already kind of on the cusp where they have him. He could, in theory, fall off a little bit. But no, if you're Detroit, you want to see Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren get on there for sure.
Yeah, I think Asar Thompson's an absolute lock for next year's team. I'm just shocked he's not on this list. That's it to me. It's utterly baffling how you can have an inarguably top 5 defender in the NBA not on your top 100 players list. I'm saying I'm sorry, you can argue that he's not a top 5 defender. You're just wrong. Yeah. You're just simply incorrect. Take a look at any of his the raw numbers, the advanced stats. The guy is an absolute demon. Absolutely crazy that he's not on this list. Yeah, I think he's an absolute lock. I think Tobias is maybe sneaking in the top 95 next year. Right. I also am of the opinion a lot of his statistical output is going to be replaced by other players this year. I just think Asar takes some more touches. I just think Ron Holland takes a few more touches. But that being said, I could see him staying on the list barely, just because he's going to be such an important glue guy for this team moving forward. It will be really interesting. Huh?
They also still don't have another power forward. So,
I mean, I'm of the belief that Asar is long-term, the ultimate, forward type, power, small forward, you know what, like LeBron was defensively for a few years there, especially in Miami, where he was really playing the 4 defensively. I could see that for Asar, but even then, LeBron was still stepping out onto the perimeter. So I see a little bit more of that for Asar moving forward, but we'll see. I just think Tobias, he's so important to this team. It will be really, really interesting to see if there is a trade that arises, because if they do make that consolidating move, it's hard to see how Tobias Harris and his expiring contract could not be a part of it. So it'll be very interesting.
I was talking about that with a couple of buddies, actually, because we were talking about this Lauri Markkanen stuff, and it's just man, you'd like to get Lauri Markkanen, but you'd kind of also really like to keep Tobias Harris because of what he brings to this team. But there just isn't a pathway for Detroit to do that, because they don't have the big contracts to move in a big deal. It's just part of how Trajan Langdon has assembled the roster and kept some of their cap flexible. He hasn't signed a ton of big contracts, so they don't have big contracts to part with in a deal to get a big piece.
Well, and that's another reason, again, why you want to re-sign Malik Beasley, in my opinion, still, is because you do have Duncan Robinson's contract that's only partially guaranteed for next year. So that's a very attractive trade asset in and of itself for any team that's looking to rebuild and shed somebody from their roster. I think that's an underrated asset and an additional reason to bring Malik Beasley back as well.
No doubt. Well, Jasper, that was everything that we had planned to cover on this week's show. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
Congrats to Cam Johnson. You're going to be a top 15 player next year, apparently. That's how it goes. You just move up. It's the honorary number 67 spot. That's for the face of the league in waiting. We all know that. So, no, man, that's about it for me. Yeah, I got to get out of here, man. I'm going to see freaking Billy Woods and Bruiser Wolf, Detroit legend Bruiser Wolf tonight. So I can't wait for that. It's going to be great. You have no idea what I'm talking about.
Who that is?
Yeah, you have no clue. I could just see it in your eyes, Aaron. I could see it all written all over your face. That's all right. Real hip hop heads know.
Man, I don't know a game like that. Sorry. Stick to Pistons, Aaron. All right. Well, before everyone goes, we thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please go hit the follow button, the subscribe button, leave a like. Let us know in the comments what you think. I'm sure the commenters are going to agree that Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson deserve to be inside ESPN's top 100 player rankings. But let us know, did someone deserve to be someone else deserve to be in it? Maybe someone like an Isaiah Stewart. Should Jaden Ivey have been in it? Let us know what you think on Cade's ranking. Just have some conversation. We love seeing it in the comment section. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe and the FanDuel Sportsbook. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate you listening. We'll see you guys next time for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.